So Gojo fans, how are we feeling? Are you okay? You need a hug? You need a hug, don't you? It's okay. Don't worry. It's fine. Everything's gonna be fine. You're gonna sit down, you're gonna watch this video, you're gonna watch this review, you're gonna subscribe, and we're just all gonna inhale copium together. And it's gonna be okay. You know what I'm saying? Well, listen, let's just say this chapter may well be the end of Jujutsu Kaisen as we know it, depending on the outcome of the next chapter. This has a lot of dialogue and a lot of stuff that's happened, and I get the feeling that Gege is trying to make up for lost time with the last chapter having almost zero dialogue. It was just straight hands, but this chapter opens up with everyone watching the fight between Gojo and Sukuna on a massive column of TVs, and it is now actually confirmed Sukuna was using domain amplification to get through Gojo's infinity in the last fight. So that last chapter where we saw that clash and it looked like Gojo was deactivating his infinity, turns out it was actually domain amplification from Sukuna, which we'll touch on a little bit more later. But we see Yuta, Hikari, and Kusakabe all talking about this, with Yuta mentioning how he saw something similar in Mekamaru's footage from Shibuya, and he's referencing the fight between Gojo and Jogo and Hanami, and I have to ask, when the fuck did Yuta get the time to see this? However, I would actually just assume it was probably around the time he said he was going to go kill Yuji. I would assume. Maybe the higher-ups briefed him on it. But Hikari goes on to say how Gojo's domain has now been neutralized and questions how it's even possible, which is where Kusakabe, who's turned out to actually be a extremely knowledgeable dude, which may come back and prove a point as to how he's taught Yuji a potential chaos technique. He mentions how domain amplification is a more refined version of simple domain, and by sheathing yourself in a domain but without the chaos technique imbued, it allows your opponent's technique to flow into that empty space and it just neutralizes it. And again, Kusakabe seems extremely knowledgeable, and again, we did see him teaching Yuji, so I can only wonder what and how much he has taught Yuji within that 1 month. And we also have to remember here that Yuji is an extremely fast learner. Look how quickly he picked up the technique of imbuing cursed energy and potential black flashes with Todo when he fought against Hanami. It was fast, and then he broke the fucking record for it. This dude is a very, very fucking quick learner. He then does go on to say how he actually can't use domain amplification, so it seems he's knowledgeable and can teach it but can't actually apply it to himself, which is kind of weird. I do also want to point out how Higuruma is watching this fight go down and mentions himself how he is getting the gist of it, which is genuinely par for the course for this dude, considering how he learned a domain expansion in just 12 days and then breaking down the steps for it from his innate curse technique, which awakened from Kenjaku's idol transfiguration. I mean, this dude is one hell of a fucking prodigy. I would genuinely love to see more Higuruma in the future. That would be a very nice thing to see. But Angel then goes on to say how the cons of amplification is that one then can't use their own innate technique, which is basically what happened in the last chapter. We saw Gojo and Sukuna just literally throw at hands, and there was very minimal chaos technique usage here. But she then does go on to say how if Sukuna does have a different plan for Infinity, then he'll win, which isn't far from what we see in this chapter. It's not far. But we do see Miwa then asking why Sukuna isn't just using his domain, and saying right after a domain battle, a technique then becomes unstable, so it would make sense for him to just immediately challenge Gojo to a domain battle first, with Karara also agreeing, and Yuji then mentioning that Gojo can be hit while within a domain, which again is a little callback to Gojo when he was caught in Jogo's domain way back when. And I like how Gege is keeping these things somewhat consistent and calling back to the earlier battles in the series. It makes me feel nostalgic about the series as a whole, and I like that he's just keeping that trend running. This is where Wiwi asks if Sukuna is assuming that he just can't win a domain battle against Gojo, and that's maybe why he hasn't activated the domain yet. And Shogo then says how given Gojo's 6 eyes and his shitty personality, Gojo's constantly catching strays off this woman, he would have likely already used his domain, which I'm genuinely glad has been cleared up, because yesterday when the leaks dropped, it was kind of implying that Gojo could read minds, and if that was the case, it would have dropped a massive fucking plot hole within the middle of Jujutsu Kaisen. It would have been crazy, and that would have been possibly my first ever actual video where I had to slate the series, because that would have been a bad thing for Gege to have dropped. That would have been terrible, I'm not gonna lie to you. So I'm glad that's been cleared up, that Gojo actually can't read minds. This is where Chosu then goes on to ask what if their domains never even clash, and goes on to explain how, based on what Yuji and Inumaki have seen, Sukuna's domain doesn't even have a barrier. And this is where everyone in the room is shocked to find out that this is even a thing that exists. And again, this is the higher tier of sorcerers, and everyone is genuinely shocked to find out how this thing is a real thing. We see Kusakabe, Hikari, Yuta, and Kashimo, by the way, all basically refuting the idea of this, even being possible, which I think is genuinely wild considering these dudes are supposed to be the next Gojos of the universe. So for them to think that it's not even really possible is crazy, and it really drives home just how far apart Sukuna really is from the rest of the gang, and even Kenjaku for that matter, because Kenjaku also has a barrierless domain, which then comes up in the next things. But we see this little panel from Miwa and Kusakabe where Miwa is like, is it really that crazy? Like, Miwa's like, maybe I can see this already being fathomed as a meme of, is it Miwa saying, is it really that crazy? Miwa's just sort of like, yeah, I could do that stuff anyway. Kusakabe decides to give her a little teaching moment, and Miwa delivers on one of the best moments in the series, and I don't even care what you say, she genuinely has two of the best moments, this being the second one. Kusakabe asks her to toss over the water, and she throws him the bottle with the water in it, because you would, that's what you do. And Kusakabe's like, no, what are you doing? I just want the water. And Miura's like, okay. She just pops that lid off there, like, and then just chucks the water all over Kusakabe, like, which I genuinely thought was unreal. It's a really fucking cool panel, but it was a cool little teaching moment from Kusakabe to Miwa, explaining how a barrier needs water within inside of it, kind of thing. But we get more of this with Maki saying, how can water even accumulate without a container? Like, and I genuinely really like the analogy of cursed energy being compared to water all the time. It's like the bringer of life, but when it's out of control, it's the bringer of death type beat. It's really cool. The analogies here is genuinely cool. But Maki then mentions how Megumi's domain was incomplete and didn't have a barrier, but Kusakabe is just like, no, that is small potatoes compared to what is happening. Sukuna is literally painting on the air. And again, it's nuts seeing all of these powerhouses sat around watching Sukuna and being in genuine utter disbelief that he can even do something like this. However, this is where Choso then reveals how Kenjaku's domain was also barrierless, and goes on to talk about how when Yuki fought him, his simple domain was useless and was ripped to shreds, and it took Tengen to deconstruct Kenjaku's domain from the outside for them to even have a chance. But then Choso says if only Yuki had have actually used her domain, and we do get this panel of Ino and Inumaki talking about Gojo using a domain and how it shouldn't really be difficult for him, but Yuta translates and saying, Inumaki is saying Gojo has no limit to his cursed energy, meaning he can use his domain more than once. And we see Kashimo getting mad here and adding how Sukuna is genuinely unreal, mentioning how the sharpness of his techniques and the activation and the way he can turn on a dime from using amplification to his innate technique, and goes on to say how if Gojo never had the 6 eyes, Sukuna would have likely already been winning the fight right now in terms of efficiency and utilization of his cursed energy. But then Yuta provides some very interesting power scaling information. I know the power scales are going to eat this up here, so now they can finally like quantify Sukuna's cursed energy here, mentioning how going off purely intuition, he thinks Sukuna has more than double his cursed energy, considering Yuta has the most cursed energy in the series as a character. That's some feat. But then goes on to mention how when it comes to cursed energy, that's not a factor for why they aren't using their domains. But this is where Momo then interjects and says how Gojo and Sukuna might not even know how their domain clash is gonna go, and that's why they haven't used it yet, which is where Higuruma brings their attention back to the TVs here, saying, here it comes. And the very next panel is a fucking domain expansion clash between Gojo and Sukuna, which, if I'm honest, it's actually insane. It looks unreal. And this is actually the first time we've seen a proper clash of domains in the series. And I don't mean like one-sided clash. We saw one between Gojo and Jogo, but that was just a one-sided beatdown. This is the first time we've ever seen two domains clash that were matched evenly. We get to see Malevolent Shrine inside the Limitless Void, and oh my fuck, it looks so good. But this is where the narrator kicks in, and you know in Jujutsu Kaisen when the narrator kicks in, some serious fucking shit's about to go down. Something really bad, something really good, or something really epic is about to go down. And depending on where you sit in the fandom, this is all three of those combined. But the narrator then kicks in and says, evenly matched, they form a pair within Gojo's barrier. The two sure hit guarantees overlap and cancel each other out. A battle with both sides expanding their domains. Should either one sustain immense damage causing the collapse of their domain, the other's sure hit technique will immediately strike evenly matched. And Kusakabe and Meimei are sat here in utter disbelief as the narrator then just carries on. Within the barrier, they are evenly matched, and the effective range of Sukuna's domain reaches even further beyond Gojo's domain and the barrier of it, with Yuji then cutting in and mentioning how barriers are weak to attacks from the outside, with this obviously being a callback to the time that Yuji literally punched his way into Mahito's barrier way back when. Gojo's domain ends up taking a lot of damage. We see the black ball just getting riddled with slices, and everything around it is just being decimated. Gojo's domain ends up shattering, and it ends up slicing Gojo's neck completely. Now, I can't tell if this is just a clean slice on the side of the neck or if this is Gojo's head being off, because the way the blood goes almost looks as if it goes around the neck, but then you could also interpret it as just a small slice on the side of the neck. But listen, this chapter was a fucking banger with a crazy cliffhanger to leave us on. Genuinely, if Gojo ends up dying here, I deadass have no idea how the story ends, because almost all of my predictions was Gojo was being the last alive and just failing to protect everyone. But it's looking like it could end up being Yuji being the last alive at this point, or it may be not even Yuji. It could actually technically be Megumi, because while Sukuna resides inside Megumi's body, Megumi is technically quote-unquote alive, so it could even be that one. But crazy chapter. But anyway, that is everything from me. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, please be sure to subscribe, so that always helps me out. And as always, I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Much love, big kisses, peace.